The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Sarah Martinez sat in the sterile waiting room of the Navy Recruitment Center in San Diego. Her hands trembled slightly as she filled out the paperwork, each life flowing easier than the last. Former Navy SEAL, Purple Heart recipient, 3 tours in Afghanistan. The words felt heavy on her tongue when she spoke them to the eager young recruiter who had been hanging on her every word for the past hour. Sarah had perfected this routine over the past 6 months. She would walk into recruitment centers, veteran affairs offices, and military support groups with her carefully crafted story. The respect in people's eyes when she mentioned her SEAL training, the way conversations stopped when she entered a room wearing her fake service ribbons, it filled a void she had carried since childhood. Growing up in foster care, moving from home to home, she had never felt special or important. But when she wore that uniform and told her stories, people listened. They cared. The recruiter, Petty Officer Johnson, was young and enthusiastic. He had been in the Navy for only 2 years and had never met a female SEAL before. Sarah knew this because there had never been any female SEALs during the time period she claimed to have served. The SEAL teams had only recently begun allowing women to attempt the training, but Sarah's fictional service dated back to 2008. It was a detail that would have exposed her immediately to anyone with real knowledge of special operations. "Ma'am, your story is absolutely incredible," Johnson said, his eyes wide with admiration. "I mean, the things you must have seen, the missions you've been on. I can't imagine the courage it took." Sarah felt the familiar twist in her stomach that came with each compliment based on her lies. Part of her wanted to stop to tell the truth, but the addiction to respect and recognition was too strong. She had been living this double life for so long that sometimes she almost believed it herself. The fictional memories felt real in her mind. The weight of gear during night raids, the brotherhood of her team, the pride of earning the Trident. "It wasn't easy," she replied, her voice taking on the practiced tone of weary experience. "But when you're out there, protecting freedom, protecting the people you love back home, you find strength you never knew you had." Johnson nodded solemnly. Sarah had learned that people wanted to hear about sacrifice and honor. They wanted their heroes to be humble but strong, scarred but unbroken. She gave them exactly what they expected. What Sarah didn't know was that Master Chief Ramirez had been listening from the next office. He had stopped by the recruitment center to pick up some paperwork and couldn't help but overhear the conversation. Something about Sarah's story didn't sit right with him. The details were too perfect, too much like scenes from movies rather than the gritty, complex reality of actual combat operations. Ramirez had served 22 years in the Navy, including 8 years with the SEALs. He knew the community was small and tight-knit. Every SEAL knew other SEALs, especially female operators, who were rare enough that their names would be known throughout the community. He had never heard of Sarah Martinez, and her story contained subtle inconsistencies that only someone with real experience would catch. The Master Chief quietly made a phone call to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. NCIS had been tracking reports of a woman impersonating a SEAL across Southern California. The descriptions matched Sarah perfectly. Mid-30s, Hispanic, medium build, with an elaborate eagle tattoo visible on her left forearm. Within an hour, 2 NCIS agents arrived at the recruitment center. Agent Patricia Cole and Agent Marcus Thompson had been working military impersonation cases for years. They knew that stolen valor cases were often complex, involving people with deep psychological needs rather than simple criminals seeking financial gain. Sarah was in the middle of describing a fictional firefight in Kandahar when Agent Cole approached her table. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Special Agent Cole with NCIS. We'd like to ask you some questions about your military service." The color drained from Sarah's face. She had always feared this moment would come, but she had convinced herself she was too careful, too thorough in her preparation to get caught. Her hands instinctively moved to cover the tattoo on her arm, a nervous habit she had developed over the months of deception. "I don't understand," Sarah stammered. "I was just talking to Petty Officer Johnson about my service. Is there a problem?" Agent Thompson stepped forward, his expression professional but not unkind. "Ma'am, We've received reports about someone impersonating a Navy SEAL in this area. We need to verify your identity and service record. Would you mind coming with us to answer some questions?" The recruitment center had gone completely silent. Other potential recruits and their families stared as Sarah was escorted toward the exit. Petty Officer Johnson watched in confusion and disappointment, suddenly, questioning every story Sarah had told him. As they walked through the parking lot toward the NCIS vehicle, Sarah's mind raced. She thought about running, but where would she go? She thought about continuing the lie, but she knew it was over. The weight of months of deception crashed down on her all at once. "Am I under arrest?" she asked quietly. "Not yet," Agent Cole replied. "But impersonating a military service member is a federal crime. We need to sort out what's true and what isn't." Sarah slumped into the back seat of the government sedan, watching the recruitment center disappear through the rear window. She thought about all the people she had lied to, all the real veterans she had insulted with her fake stories. The respect she had craved so desperately now seemed hollow and meaningless. The drive to the NCIS field office took 20 minutes through heavy San Diego traffic. Sarah stared out the window at the city she had called home for the past year, wondering if she would ever see it again as a free woman. She had heard about people going to prison for stolen valor. The thought terrified her. At the field office, Sarah was processed like any other suspect. Her fingerprints were taken, her photo was captured, and her personal belongings were cataloged. The eagle tattoo on her arm was photographed as evidence. It was a beautiful piece of artwork, incredibly detailed and clearly expensive. Agent Cole made a note to research its significance. "Mrs. Martinez," Agent Thompson said as they sat down in the interview room, "before we begin, I want you to know that we've already verified your identity through various databases. We know you never served in the military. What we're trying to understand is why you've been telling people you were a SEAL." Sarah looked down at her hands, still trembling from the shock of being caught. For the first time in months, she was forced to confront the reality of what she had done. The lies had started small, telling a bartender she was a veteran to get a free drink. But they had grown and multiplied until she was living an entirely fictional life. "I don't know," she whispered. "I guess I just wanted to matter. I wanted people to think I was someone important, someone worth respecting." The agents exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of psychological motivation they encountered in most stolen valor cases. People seeking recognition, belonging, and respect they felt they couldn't earn through their real accomplishments. "Sarah," Agent Cole said gently, "I want you to understand something. What you've done is serious. You've committed a federal crime that carries real penalties. But right now, we're more interested in understanding the full scope of your activities. How long has this been going on? Where else have you made these claims?" Sarah spent the next 2 hours confessing to everything. Every recruitment center she had visited, every veterans group she had infiltrated, every bar where she had spun tales of heroism and sacrifice. The agents took detailed notes, building a comprehensive case file. As the interview concluded, Sarah was formally charged with violating the Stolen Valor Act and released on her own recognizance pending trial. She would have to appear in federal court in 3 weeks. The maximum penalty was a year in federal prison and a substantial fine. Walking out of the NCIS building in the late afternoon sun, Sarah felt empty and afraid. Her carefully constructed false identity had crumbled in a single day. She had no idea that her story was just beginning, and that the tattoo the agents had photographed would soon change everything in ways she couldn't imagine. The eagle on her arm seemed to mock her now, a beautiful lie covering the skin of a broken woman who had sought glory in someone else's sacrifice. But sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself in the most unexpected circumstances, and Sarah's eagle held secrets that even she didn't fully understand. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in the defendant's chair of federal district court in downtown San Diego, her court-appointed attorney whispering last-minute advice in her ear. The courtroom was smaller than she had expected, but the weight of federal authority pressed down on her like a physical force. Judge Patricia Hartwell presided over the proceedings with the stern efficiency of someone who had seen countless cases of military impersonation cross her bench. The prosecution was straightforward and devastating. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chun methodically presented evidence of Sarah's deception. Video surveillance from recruitment centers, witness testimony from veterans groups, and social media posts where Sarah had claimed military service painted a clear picture of systematic fraud. Your Honor, Attorney Chun said, holding up enlarged photographs of Sarah's fake military identification cards, the defendant didn't just tell a few lies at a bar. She created an entire false identity, complete with forged documents, fake service ribbons, and elaborate stories designed to deceive military personnel and veterans organizations. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated campaign of deception that lasted over 6 months. Sarah's attorney, public defender Jennifer Walsh, had prepared what defense she could. Walsh was experienced with military impersonation cases and understood that her client's best hope lay in emphasizing the psychological factors behind the deception rather than denying the facts. Your Honor, Walsh argued, my client's actions, while inexcusable, stem from deep-seated psychological trauma and a desperate need for acceptance and belonging. Ms. Martinez grew up in foster care, bouncing between homes, never developing a stable sense of identity or self-worth. The military represents everything she wished she could have been, part of something larger than herself, respected, valued, significant. Judge Hartwell had heard similar explanations before. While she sympathized with difficult backgrounds, the law was clear about the consequences of stolen valor. The courtroom was filled with real veterans who had come to see justice served. Their presence reminded everyone why these cases mattered so deeply to the military community. As the proceedings continued, Sarah noticed a distinguished older man in navy dress blues sitting in the back row of the courtroom gallery. His uniform displayed an impressive array of ribbons and medals, and his bearing suggested high rank. She couldn't understand why someone of such obvious importance would attend her small, relatively routine hearing. The man was Rear Admiral Robert Sterling, a career Navy officer with 35 years of service. He had commanded destroyers in the Pacific, served as a Pentagon staff officer, and led humanitarian missions around the world. Admiral Sterling made it a point to attend stolen valor prosecutions when possible, believing that military impersonation diminished the sacrifices of real service members. But Admiral Sterling wasn't just there as a concerned veteran. He had received a call from Agent Cole at NCIS about the defendant's tattoo. The agent had sent him the photographs, and something about the eagle design had triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. He decided to attend the hearing to see the tattoo in person. Judge Hartwell was preparing to render her verdict when Admiral Sterling stood up. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but may I approach the bench? I believe I have information relevant to this case. The judge looked surprised, but nodded. Admiral, you may approach, but this is highly unusual. Are you appearing as a witness? No, Your Honor, but I believe there may be circumstances about the defendant that the court should consider before sentencing. Sarah watched in confusion as the distinguished admiral walked toward the front of the courtroom. Her attorney leaned over and whispered, I have no idea what this is about. Do you know this man? Sarah shook her head. She had never seen Admiral Sterling before in her life. But as he approached, his eyes were fixed on her left forearm, where the eagle tattoo was clearly visible below her rolled-up sleeve. Your Honor, Admiral Sterling said quietly, may I examine the defendant's tattoo more closely? I believe it may have significance that changes the context of this case. Judge Hartwell frowned. Admiral, I'm not sure what relevance a tattoo has to charges of military impersonation, but if both counsel agree, you may approach the defendant. Both attorneys nodded their consent, though neither understood what was happening. Sarah felt her heart racing as the Admiral walked over to where she sat. When he got close enough to see the tattoo clearly, his expression changed completely. The eagle was incredibly detailed, with distinctive feather patterns and a unique pose. Its wings were spread wide, and clutched in its talons was a banner with numbers that most people would assume were decorative. But Admiral Sterling recognized those numbers immediately. They weren't random. They were coordinates. "Miss Martinez," the Admiral said softly, "where did you get this tattoo?" "I've had it since I was 18, Sarah replied, confused. "I got it at a parlor in Oceanside when I aged out of foster care. I just liked the design." Admiral Sterling felt his pulse quicken. "Do you know what these numbers mean?" he asked, pointing to the banner in the eagle's talons. Sarah shook her head. The tattoo artist said they were just decorative numbers to make it look more military. The Admiral turned to Judge Hartwell. "Your Honor, those coordinates mark the location of a classified operation that took place 15 years ago. Very few people would know their significance, and even fewer would have access to them." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as people tried to understand what was happening. Attorney Chun looked puzzled, while Sarah's defender Walsh seemed cautiously optimistic that this unexpected development might help her client. "Admiral," Judge Hartwell said, "I'm going to need you to be more specific about what you're suggesting." Admiral Sterling looked directly at Sarah. "Miss Martinez, what was your mother's name?" "I never knew my mother," Sarah replied. "I was surrendered to Child Protective Services when I was 2 days old. I was told she was young and couldn't take care of me." "What about your birth records? Have you ever seen your original birth certificate?" Sarah's attorney stood up. "Your Honor, I object to this line of questioning. Admiral Sterling is not a sworn witness, and I don't understand what relevance family history has to military impersonation charges." But Admiral Sterling pressed on. "Your Honor, I believe Miss Martinez may be the daughter of Petty Officer First Class Elena Martinez, who died in the line of duty during the operation marked by those coordinates." The courtroom fell completely silent. Sarah felt the world spinning around her. "My mother was in the Navy." Admiral Sterling nodded gravely. "Elena Martinez was a Navy corpsman attached to a SEAL team during a classified mission in 2008. She was killed while providing medical aid under fire, saving the lives of 3 wounded operators. She was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for her heroism." Sarah's hands began to shake uncontrollably. Everything she had believed about her background, her identity, her family history was suddenly shifting beneath her feet. "Elena never told anyone in her unit that she had a child," Admiral Sterling continued. "Military records show she was unmarried, and her personnel file listed no dependents. But she had distinctive tattoos, including an eagle identical to yours. I was her commanding officer during that final deployment." Judge Hartwell called for a recess while the shocking revelation was sorted out. Sarah sat in stunned silence as court officials scrambled to contact military personnel offices and vital records departments. Her attorney was frantically taking notes and asking questions, trying to understand how this information might affect the case. During the break, Admiral Sterling approached Sarah directly. "If you're Elena's daughter, then you've spent your entire life not knowing that your mother was a genuine war hero. She was one of the bravest sailors I ever served with." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "Are you sure? How can you be certain?" "The tattoo is too specific to be coincidental," Admiral Sterling explained. "Elena got that tattoo just before her deployment. She told me it was to remind her of home, of what she was fighting for. Those coordinates mark the spot where she made her final stand, where she chose to risk everything to save her teammates." When court reconvened 30 minutes later, the atmosphere had completely changed. Judge Hartwell announced that the proceedings would be suspended pending verification of Sarah's parentage and military family history. NCIS agents were already working to obtain DNA samples and military medical records. "Miss Martinez," Judge Hartwell said, "if Admiral Sterling's information is correct, it doesn't excuse your actions, but it certainly provides context that this court must consider. You may have been seeking connection to a military heritage that was rightfully yours all along." As Sarah left the courthouse that day, her mind was reeling with possibilities. Could it be true? Was her mother really a war hero? Had Sarah spent years pretending to be something she actually had a legitimate claim to honor through blood and sacrifice? The eagle tattoo on her arm suddenly felt different. Instead of a symbol of her deception, It might be a connection to truth she had never known existed. But the questions were just beginning, and the answers would challenge everything Sarah thought she knew about herself and her place in the world. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning that would change Sarah's life forever. She sat in Attorney Walsh's cramped office, hands trembling as she held the official laboratory report. The numbers and scientific terminology meant little to her, but the conclusion was written in plain English at the bottom of the page. Probability of maternity, 99.97%, Elena Martinez, the Navy corpsman who had died heroically in Afghanistan 15 years earlier, was indeed Sarah's biological mother. Attorney Walsh set down her coffee cup and leaned back in her chair. Sarah, this changes everything about your case and about your life. The past 3 weeks have been a whirlwind of investigations, interviews, and revelations. NCIS had worked with military personnel records, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and various child welfare agencies to piece together a story that read like fiction but was documented fact. Elena Martinez had been 19 years old when she gave birth to Sarah in a San Diego hospital. The father was unknown, likely a brief relationship that Elena had kept private. Military medical records showed that Elena had suffered from severe postpartum depression and had made the difficult decision to surrender her daughter for adoption, believing she couldn't provide adequate care while pursuing her military career. What made the situation more complex was that Elena had apparently regretted her decision almost immediately. Military psychiatric records, now declassified due to Sarah's legitimate claim as next of kin, revealed that Elena had been working with social services to regain custody of her daughter when she deployed to Afghanistan. She had completed parenting classes, established stable housing, and was saving money to create a proper home for Sarah. The deployment that killed Elena was supposed to be her last. She had planned to leave the military when she returned and focus on rebuilding her relationship with her daughter. The coordinates tattooed on Elena's arm, and later replicated on Sarah's, marked not just the location where Elena died, but the place where a mother's dream of reunion was ended forever. Admiral Sterling had become personally invested in Sarah's case. He visited her regularly, sharing stories about Elena that filled in gaps Sarah had wondered about her entire life. Elena had been fiercely intelligent, incredibly brave, and deeply troubled by her decision to give up her child. Your mother talked about you constantly during those final weeks, Admiral Sterling told Sarah during one of their meetings. She carried a photo of you as a baby in her medical kit. She said you were the reason she wanted to come home alive. The military community's response to Sarah's story was complex and divided. Some veterans felt that her biological connection to a war hero didn't excuse her fraudulent claims of personal service. Others saw her as a victim of circumstances, a daughter who had unknowingly sought connection to a heritage that was rightfully hers. Real SEALs who had served with Elena came forward to share their memories. Master Chief Rodriguez, who had been Elena's team leader during that final mission, visited Sarah to tell her exactly how her mother had died. We were ambushed during a medical evacuation, Rodriguez explained, his voice heavy with memory. Elena was trying to stabilize a wounded operator when the enemy launched a second attack. She could have taken cover, could have saved herself. Instead, she stayed with her patient. She took 3 rounds to the chest while maintaining pressure on his wounds. Because of her actions, that SEAL went home to his family. Sarah learned that Elena had been recommended for the Medal of Honor, the military's highest decoration, but political complexities surrounding the classified nature of the mission had resulted in the Silver Star instead. The medal, along with Elena's other military honors, had been stored in a military warehouse for 15 years because there were no known next of kin to claim them. The legal implications of Sarah's newfound identity were significant. Attorney Walsh worked with federal prosecutors to negotiate a resolution that took into account the extraordinary circumstances. While Sarah's actions remained illegal regardless of her parentage, her psychological motivation was now understood in a completely different context. Your Honor, Walsh argued during a subsequent court hearing, my client spent 18 years in foster care, never knowing that her mother was a decorated war hero. Her desire to claim military service while misguided and illegal, was actually an unconscious attempt to connect with her true heritage. She was seeking a belonging that was already hers by birthright. Federal prosecutor Chun, while sympathetic to the circumstances, maintained that the law had been broken. The defendant's personal story is compelling, but stolen valor undermines the sacrifices of all service members. We cannot simply excuse federal crimes because of family history. Judge Hartwell faced an unprecedented situation. Military impersonation cases were typically straightforward, but Sarah's case involved factors that existing legal precedents hadn't anticipated. The judge ordered psychological evaluations and character assessments while considering appropriate sentencing. During this period, Sarah began attending therapy to process the overwhelming revelations about her identity and family history. Dr. Rebecca Santos, a psychologist specializing in adoption trauma and military families, helped Sarah understand the psychological forces that had driven her to create fictional military service. You were unconsciously seeking connection to something that was actually part of your identity, Dr. Santos explained. The military values of honor, service, and belonging that attracted you weren't foreign concepts. They were part of your genetic and cultural inheritance through your mother. Sarah also began connecting with Elena's former teammates and friends, learning about the woman who had given her life. Elena had been known for her quick wit, her dedication to her patients, and her fierce loyalty to her team. She had planned to become a nurse when she left the military, wanting to continue serving others in civilian life. The most emotional moment came when Master Chief Rodriguez brought Sarah a box of Elena's personal effects that the military had preserved. Inside were photos of Sarah as a baby, letters Elena had written but never sent, and a journal detailing her plans for their reunion. One journal entry, dated just 3 weeks before Elena's death, read, "I think about Sarah every day. I know I made the wrong choice giving her up, but I was so young and scared. When I get home, I'm going to fight to get her back. I want to tell her about our family, about service, about what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. I want her to be proud of where she comes from." Reading her mother's words, Sarah finally understood the deep psychological need that had driven her to impersonate military service. She had been seeking the very connection that Elena had wanted to give her. The military community began rallying around Sarah's story. Veterans organizations offered support and guidance. The Navy offered her the opportunity to claim Elena's medals and honors through proper channels. Most significantly, several REAL SEALs who had served with Elena invited Sarah to attend veterans events as an honored family member. "You don't need to pretend to be something you're not," Master Chief Rodriguez told her. "Being Elena Martinez's daughter is honor enough. Your mother's courage and sacrifice earned you a place in our community." But Sarah's legal troubles were far from over. Regardless of her family history, she had committed federal crimes that required consequences. The question facing Judge Hartwell was how to balance justice with mercy, punishment with understanding. As Sarah awaited final sentencing, she grappled with complex emotions about her identity, her actions, and her future. She was no longer the woman who had walked into that recruitment center months earlier. The truth about her mother had given her the belonging she had desperately sought, but it had also forced her to confront the damage her deceptions had caused to real veterans and their families. The eagle tattoo on her arm now carried weight and meaning she was only beginning to understand. It connected her to a mother she had never known and a military heritage she was still learning to honor properly. But it also reminded her daily of the lies she had told and the trust she had broken in her misguided search for identity and respect. The story of Sarah Martinez and her war hero mother spread through military circles like wildfire. What began as a routine stolen valor case had become something unprecedented, a daughter unknowingly seeking connection to a military legacy that was rightfully hers through blood and sacrifice. The response from the military community was complex and deeply divided. At the Navy SEAL Association meeting in Virginia Beach, retired Master Chief Danny Wright stood before 200 Special Operations veterans to address the controversy that had consumed their community for weeks. "Brothers," Wright said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in Special Operations, "we've got a situation that challenges everything we thought we knew about stolen valor. Elena Martinez was one of ours. She died saving SEALs. But her daughter spent months lying about service she never performed. How do we reconcile that?" The room erupted in heated discussion. Some SEALs felt that Sarah's deception was unforgivable regardless of her parentage. Others argued that her psychological motivation was understandable given her circumstances. The debate reflected a broader struggle within the military community about identity, belonging, and the price of honor. Senior Chief Marcus Thompson, who had served on Elena's final mission, stood up to address his fellow veterans. "I held Elena's hand while she died," he said quietly, his words cutting through the noise. Her last words weren't about glory or honor or the mission. She said, "Tell my baby girl I'm sorry." We didn't even know she had a daughter then, but Elena was thinking about her child as she took her last breath. The revelation that Elena's final thoughts had been about Sarah added another layer of complexity to an already emotional situation. How could the military community condemn a daughter for seeking connection to a mother who had died thinking about her? At the same time, real veterans who had been deceived by Sarah's lies were struggling with their own feelings of betrayal and confusion. Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez, who had shared war stories with Sarah at a veteran support group, felt personally violated by the deception. "I told her things I don't tell my own family," Gonzalez said during a local news interview. "I opened up about my PTSD, my struggles coming home, because I thought I was talking to someone who understood. Finding out she was lying about everything makes me question whether I can trust anyone in the veteran community." The damage Sarah's deception had caused was real and personal. Veterans who had welcomed her into their circles, who had shared their most painful memories and experiences, felt foolish and betrayed. The psychological impact extended beyond Sarah herself to affect the broader trust within military communities. But Elena's former teammates began organizing support for Sarah, arguing that she deserved a chance at redemption and connection to her mother's legacy. They created the Elena Martinez Memorial Fund, designed to help military children who had been separated from their parents due to service obligations. Captain Jennifer Walsh, a Navy psychologist who specialized in military family trauma, explained the phenomenon during a Department of Defense briefing on the case. Sarah Martinez represents thousands of military children who grow up disconnected from their parents' service. The psychological need to understand and connect with that heritage is profound and often unconscious. The case attracted national media attention, with news outlets struggling to categorize the story. Was Sarah a criminal who deserved punishment, or a victim of circumstances beyond her control? Public opinion was sharply divided, with comment sections on news articles revealing deep disagreements about military service, family legacy, and personal responsibility. Military families, in particular, connected with Sarah's story. Amanda Foster, whose husband had been killed in Iraq, leaving behind a 2-year-old son, started a blog about the challenges facing military children who lose parents in combat. "My son asks about his father constantly," Foster wrote. "He wants to know about military service, about what his daddy did, about whether he can be a soldier too when he grows up. If something happened to me, if my son grew up in foster care without knowing his family history, I could easily see him making the same choices Sarah did." The Elena Martinez Memorial Foundation, established by Elena's former teammates, reached out to Sarah with an offer that surprised everyone involved. They invited her to become the foundation's first beneficiary and, eventually, its spokesperson, helping other military children connect with their heritage through proper channels. Master Chief Rodriguez explained the decision during a meeting with Sarah and her attorney. Elena would have wanted her daughter to know about military service, about honor and sacrifice, and what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. Sarah sought that connection in the wrong way, but the need itself was legitimate. The offer came with conditions. Sarah would have to complete her legal obligations, accept responsibility for her actions, and commit to helping educate others about the proper way to honor military service. She would tell her story honestly, including the mistakes she had made and the damage her deceptions had caused. "You can't change the lies you told," Rodriguez told her, "but you can use your experience to help other military children find their place in our community without repeating your mistakes." Sarah was overwhelmed by the unexpected offer of redemption and belonging. For the first time since her arrest, she saw a path forward that didn't end in disgrace and isolation. But she was also acutely aware of the skepticism and anger her case had generated among some veterans. The military community's response to the Foundation's offer was mixed. Some veterans felt it sent the wrong message about consequences for stolen valor. Others saw it as an opportunity to transform a negative situation into something positive for military families. Admiral Sterling, who had become an unofficial mentor to Sarah, supported the Foundation's decision. "The military has always been about second chances, about redemption through service," he said. "Elena's daughter deserves the opportunity to honor her mother's memory properly." The debates surrounding Sarah's case led to broader discussions within military circles about family legacy, identity, and belonging. Support groups for military children began forming across the country, recognizing that Sarah's story represented a larger issue affecting thousands of families. Dr. Rebecca Santos, Sarah's therapist, observed the community response with professional interest. "What we're seeing is a military community grappling with its own values," she noted. "They value honor and truth, but they also value family and redemption." Sarah's case forces them to reconcile those sometimes competing principles. As Sarah prepared for her final court sentencing, she carried the weight of both condemnation and support from the military community. Some saw her as a criminal who had dishonored their sacrifices. Others saw her as Elena Martinez's daughter, deserving of a place in the community her mother had died defending. The eagle tattoo that had started Sarah's journey toward truth had become a symbol of the complex relationship between individual choices and family legacy. It represented both her mother's heroism and her own mistakes, both her rightful heritage and her wrongful deception. Elena's former teammates made it clear that any future relationship with Sarah would depend on her accepting full responsibility for her actions and dedicating herself to honoring military service properly. The path to redemption would be long and difficult, requiring Sarah to rebuild trust she had broken and prove her commitment to the values her mother had died defending. The military community was watching to see whether Elena Martinez's daughter would choose honor or continue down the path of deception that had brought her to this crossroads. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood before Judge Hartwell for her final sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed with an unusual mix of supporters and skeptics from the military community. Admiral Sterling sat in the front row, while several of Elena's former teammates filled the gallery. Also present were veterans who had been deceived by Sarah's lies, their faces reflecting the complex emotions surrounding her case. Judge Hartwell had spent weeks reviewing precedents, psychological evaluations, and victim impact statements. The case had generated national attention and forced the federal court system to grapple with unprecedented questions about stolen valor, family legacy, and the possibility of redemption. "Ms. Martinez," Judge Hartwell began, "you have pleaded guilty to violations of the Stolen Valor Act. Your actions were deliberate, sustained, and caused real harm to members of the military community who trusted you. The law requires consequences for such behavior." Sarah stood with her attorney, her heart pounding as she waited to learn her fate. Over the past months, she had dedicated herself to understanding the full impact of her deceptions and working to make amends. She had attended veteran support groups not as a fake SEAL, but as the daughter of a war hero seeking to understand her mother's legacy. However, the judge continued, "This case presents extraordinary circumstances that this court cannot ignore. The defendant's actions, while inexcusable, were driven by an unconscious desire to connect with a military heritage that was legitimately hers through her mother's heroic service and sacrifice. Judge Hartwell outlined the unique factors that had influenced her decision. Sarah's childhood in foster care, her lack of knowledge about her mother's military service, and the psychological trauma of growing up without family identity had all contributed to her misguided search for belonging. The court sentences Miss Martinez to 12 months of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service to be performed with veterans organizations, and restitution to cover the costs of the federal investigation, Judge Hartwell announced. Additionally, the defendant will participate in a restorative justice program, meeting directly with veterans she deceived to offer personal apologies and understanding. The sentence was lighter than many stolen valor cases, but it came with conditions that would require Sarah to confront the full impact of her actions. Over the following year, she would have to rebuild trust within a community she had betrayed while learning to honor her mother's legacy properly. Sarah's first stop after sentencing was the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in La Jolla, where she began her community service working with combat veterans suffering from PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. The work was emotionally challenging, bringing her face-to-face with the real struggles of military service that she had trivialized with her fictional stories. Sergeant Major Robert Shun, who oversaw the volunteer program, was initially skeptical about having Sarah work with vulnerable veterans. "These men and women have been through hell," he told her during orientation. "They don't need someone who lied about military service pretending to understand their pain." But Sarah approached the work with genuine humility and dedication. She didn't pretend to understand combat trauma or military service. Instead, she focused on basic support tasks, helping veterans navigate paperwork, providing transportation to appointments, and simply listening when they needed someone to talk to. Master Chief Rodriguez, who had promised Elena he would look after her daughter if he ever found her, visited Sarah regularly during her community service. He brought other SEALs who had served with Elena, gradually building a support network for Sarah within the military community. "Your mother would be proud of the work you're doing here," Rodriguez told Sarah during one visit. "She always said that service wasn't about the uniform or the medals. It was about taking care of people who needed help." The restorative justice component of Sarah's sentence proved to be the most difficult aspect of her rehabilitation. She had to meet personally with veterans she had deceived, offering apologies and trying to understand the damage her lies had caused. The meeting with Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez was particularly challenging. Gonzalez had trusted Sarah enough to share deeply personal experiences about her deployment to Afghanistan and her struggles with PTSD upon returning home. "You made me feel like a fool," Gonzalez told Sarah during their supervised meeting. "I told you things I don't tell my therapist because I thought you understood. I thought you'd been where I've been." Sarah listened without making excuses or trying to justify her actions. "I can't change what I did," she said quietly. "I can't undo the betrayal you feel. But I want you to know that every story you shared with me mattered. Your service, your sacrifice, your struggles, they're real and they're important, and I'm sorry I diminished that by pretending to understand when I didn't." Some of these meetings led to understanding and eventual forgiveness. Others ended with veterans who remained angry and hurt by Sarah's deception. Sarah learned to accept both responses as valid and necessary parts of her accountability process. The Elena Martinez Memorial Foundation, meanwhile, was growing into a significant resource for military children who had been separated from their parents due to death, deployment, or family breakdown. Sarah gradually became more involved in the foundation's work, sharing her story as a cautionary tale while helping other military children connect with their heritage through proper channels. Dr. Rebecca Santos documented Sarah's progress in a case study that would influence how the military community approached similar situations in the future. "What we learned from Sarah's case," Dr. Santos wrote, "is that the desire to connect with military heritage is a powerful psychological force that can lead to destructive behavior when not properly channeled." Sarah's story began attracting attention from other military children who had grown up disconnected from their parents' service. She received letters from young adults who had made similar choices or were tempted to fabricate military service for acceptance and recognition. One letter from a 22-year-old whose father had died in Iraq particularly moved Sarah. "I've been thinking about telling people I was in the military because I want them to respect me the way they respected my dad. Reading about your experience helped me realize there are better ways to honor his memory." The foundation established a mentorship program pairing military children with veterans who could help them understand their heritage and find appropriate ways to honor their parents' service. Sarah became the program's first coordinator, using her experience to identify young people at risk of making similar mistakes. Admiral Sterling, who had been instrumental in uncovering Sarah's true identity, remained a steady presence in her life. He helped her understand military culture, traditions, and the proper ways to honor Elena's memory and sacrifice. "Your mother didn't die for glory or recognition," Admiral Sterling explained during one of their regular meetings. "She died because she couldn't abandon someone who needed help. That's the kind of service that really matters, putting others before yourself, even when nobody's watching." As Sarah's probation neared its end, she faced decisions about her future. The foundation had offered her a permanent position, and several veterans organizations had expressed interest in her advocacy work. But she was also aware that her past would always be part of her story. The eagle tattoo on her arm had taken on new meaning over the past year. What had once been a symbol of her deception had become a reminder of her responsibility to honor her mother's memory properly. She had added Elena's service dates and military decorations around the original design, creating a memorial that told the truth about her family's military legacy. On the anniversary of Elena's death, Sarah attended a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery where her mother's name was added to a memorial wall honoring combat medics killed in action. Standing with Elena's former teammates, Sarah finally felt the legitimate belonging she had sought through deception. Master Chief Rodriguez spoke at the ceremony about Elena's courage and dedication. Elena Martinez saved lives through her service and her sacrifice, he said. Today, her daughter continues that tradition of service by helping military families stay connected to their heritage and by showing others that redemption is possible through honest acknowledgement of mistakes and dedication to making amends. Sarah's journey from stolen valor to legitimate belonging had taken over a year of hard work, painful self-examination, and gradual rebuilding of trust within the military community. Not everyone had forgiven her, and some veterans remained skeptical of her transformation. But she had found a way to honor her mother's legacy while taking responsibility for her own choices. The Elena Martinez Memorial Foundation continued to grow, helping hundreds of military children connect with their heritage through proper channels. Sarah's story became a cornerstone of their educational programs, demonstrating both the dangers of seeking belonging through deception and the possibility of finding authentic purpose through service to others. As Sarah looked toward the future, she carried the lessons of her mother's sacrifice and her own mistakes. The eagle on her arm would always remind her of both the honor she had inherited and the responsibility she bore to live up to Elena's example through honest service to her community. Elena Martinez had died saving lives on a battlefield in Afghanistan. Her daughter had found her own way to save lives by helping military children find their place in the warrior community through truth rather than deception, and by showing that even the most serious mistakes could be transformed into opportunities for genuine service and redemption.